today's big interview, Paul O'Sullivan from Forensics for Justice and South Africa's ace investigative sleuth. You like that intro, Paul? Ace investigative sleuth. I suppose nowadays I could also call you best-selling author. How's the book been going?
Yeah, it's going well. We've done our second reprint. So, yeah.
That's pretty good.
I'd like to sell a lot more, though, because the money, the proceeds of the sale of the book is funding Forensics for Justice. So it would be quite useful to have that, the book selling a few more of them, you know.
Well, that's good news. So in other words, you're into your second reprint. I mean, how many copies are we talking about here, Paul?
God, you know, I didn't know we were going to discuss it. I haven't. My brain's been busy with other stuff, but I think it's 10,000 up to now.
Brilliant. Well, that's a bestseller for sure in South African context. What you are busy with right now is whether you're going to have to go after another commissioner of police. Now, for those who don't know the O'Sullivan story, you took on Jackie Celebi over a decade ago, had him put behind bars.
20 years ago.
20 years ago.
I took Jackie Celebi on in 2002. So that's 20 years ago. And it took me until, actually it was 2001, so it's 21 years ago. It took me until 2008, January 2008, for him to be given leave of absence. You know, he should have been suspended. But what Mbeki did was allowed him to take leave of absence to defend himself. And then he also resigned as the head of Interpol, so that he wouldn't bring Interpol into disrepute while he was defending himself. And that was in January 2008. And Interpol, God bless their cotton socks, even sent the General Secretary down to give evidence at his trial and say what a nice guy he was. And of course, it opened a whole can of worms because other criminals popped out of the woodwork. People like Richard Ndluli, Lawrence Morebi, Nonkobo Jiba, and a whole host of people, which I opened a docket against in 2012. After I waited till the appeal of Jackie Celebi had failed before I opened that docket, because I didn't want I didn't want to interfere with his appeal process in case people tried to accuse me of muddying the waters. So I prepared the docket, but I only opened it in October 2012. And that docket ran into what I suppose we can call the other dockets, which involved in state capture and, you know, the conduct of the Sunday Times in promoting three certain narratives, being the Zimbabwe renditions, the Cato Manor death squad, and the last one, but not least, the SARS rogue spy units. So those three narratives were run by the Sunday Times. And as you know, in 2018, I managed to get them to, with a bit of beating, I managed to get them to issue a full front page apology to the country for what they did on those three narratives. But of course, by that stage, the damage had already been done. The law enforcement agencies had been eviscerated, and as a result, state capture took place. And I made the point that state capture, the enabling aspects of state capture was the evisceration of the criminal justice system, something which Sondo, for reasons best known to himself, has failed to report on.
Let's move on to the modern day. Fast forward a little. And where we are now is a new Commissioner of Police has been appointed. In between, we had Patlani, and you and I have spoken at some length about Patlani and his suspension as well. But now we have a new Commissioner of Police. And ahead of the time, ahead of the March appointment, you were given sight or some insight into who the candidates were. Just take us through that, how that was possible, and indeed what happened. Because the candidate who was appointed was actually Patlani's deputy for 6 years, which in itself is rather strange. But did you advise that this would be the guy, the best man for the job?
No. In fact, we produced a report. We were given a list of 8 names of people that were potential nominees, if you want to call it that. And, it was clear that some of those names were put there by the Minister of Crime or the Minister of Police, whatever you want to call him. And we picked up on that, but we tried to do a impartial review of all the 8 names that we were given, and that involved us in carrying out lifestyle audits and doing a lot of digging and scratching around, which we did, and we produced a report, which is a confidential report, obviously, and we sent it to Bajani Chowki, who's the right-hand man of Cyril. And I think I made the point that I bumped into the Minister of Finance. He happened to be sitting next to me on a plane from Durban. And somehow the subject of the errant leadership of the police came up. And he then mentioned that he was on a panel that had been formed to advise and guide Cyril on who should be appointed as the chief of police. And I said, oh, coincidentally, I've just given a report to Cyril about the 8 names that were on the list. Maybe you should ask for that report. And he asked me if I would send it to him. So I agreed to send it to him in confidence, which I did. And out of the 8 names, there were only really 2 people that we could see were clean, squeaky clean. And of those 2, the one person, in our opinion, probably didn't necessarily have the right mindset and skill set to be the chief of police, but the other person was definitely, the shining star and the person that should have been given the job as chief of police. And coincidentally, he's the same person that fired Patlani from the police, Lieutenant General Johannes Reed, a coloured person, so he's not a white. His name sounds like he could be white, but he's not. He's coloured. And actually, if you look at his ID photograph, he looks more black than coloured. So he could have fit the bill quite easily. And curiously enough, he was invited to go for an interview. And then the day before the interview, he got a phone call and told, no, he's no longer required to attend the interview. And we thought that was very strange. But one of the names of the 8 names was this fellow Masemola. And our lifestyle audit of him clearly showed that he was living beyond his means. And we thought, and he had judgments against him. Now, if you're chief of police, you need to be squeaky clean. And he wasn't squeaky clean. And we found in our research that he was the person that had purchased a number of motor vehicles from the crime. He was at one stage involved with crime intelligence, and he'd purchased a number of motor vehicles to the tune of 35 million rand, unlawfully. And he'd done so at the instance of the then acting chief of police. So we made it clear that was a big red flag as well. And then, as well as the judgments against him, we were able to see that he was engaging himself in what we call revolving door credit, where you borrow from Peter to pay back Paul. And the amount you borrow each time you borrow is a bit more. And we said this makes him wholly unsuitable. And then the last thing that we said made him unsuitable was that in March of this year, he only had 16 months to go before his 60th birthday. Now, why would you hire somebody that's only got 16 months to go to clean up the police, unless you intend at the time you hire them to extend their contract beyond retirement age? So if a person had extra special skills that made that person super duper and really worth employing in a position like that, I would be inclined to motivate it, even if he's only got 16 months to go, by saying, look, and it should have been done publicly, he's only got 16 months to go, but we intend to extend that 16 months. And that wasn't done. So it's a bit of a problem. And of course, as you know, the newspaper this week, the Sunday World, which is a bit of a tabloid, I think it's 50% advertising and 50% tabloid, but they ran a very good story. And the story was written by George Matlala, who's a very experienced journalist. And in fact, I think if he's not editor-in-chief, he's either running Sunday World or he's high up on the list of people that are running it. And he ran a very good story. And there's no doubt from that story that Masemola, together with Mkhwanazi, who happens to be the same person that was the acting chief of police at the time when the 35 million rands worth of cars were bought. And by the way, for those that can't remember, the reason he was acting chief of police was because the real chief of police at that stage was a gentleman by the name of Bekichelli, who'd become embroiled in a whole leasing scandal over buildings which a BEE entrepreneur was going to buy these buildings on the strength of an unlawfully created lease by the police at 3 times the market rent. So a whole lot of fancy footwork went on there. But the bottom line is that Bekichelli was suspended, and while he was on suspension, there was a commission of inquiry into his fitness to hold office, which found he wasn't fit to hold office. And Mkhwanazi was then running the show. And then what Mkhwanazi did, together with Fannie Masemola, was they spent 35 million or 38 million, something like that, out of the crime intelligence funds to buy these luxury motor cars. And we were able to determine that one of these cars was handed unlawfully, free of charge, to then Police Minister Nathi Mthethwa. So, all these people are a bunch of thugs, and they all belong behind bars. And this is the same Nathi Mthethwa, by the way, who appointed Mkhwanazi as the acting chief of police. And while all this was going on, the crime intelligence funds were used to improve his private property as well. They built a wall around his house. So there's a whole lot of scandal here. And that was raised in the Zondo inquiry because one of the whistleblowers, in fact, not the same whistleblower that came to us, but a whistleblower came to us with that story back in 2011 or 2012. So we were fully aware of all that. And nothing happened. Nobody had, I was frying bigger fish. So I parked it for the time being, but I brought this back onto the table in March this year when we issued a report as to who should or should not. And we raised some very serious red flags over Masemola.
But he was appointed anyway. And I guess that's where we are at the moment. And thanks for for sketching all of that and all the background, and a really good piece by the Sunday World, as you say, over the weekend. But it appears as though there's a group of people, some of whom have now been exposed and being charged, but others who are still within the group, Masemola, the chief of South Africa's police amongst them, who is very closely linked with the Minister of Police as well, Becket Cele, which you've unpacked all of that. And now he's being asked questions, according to that newspaper article. However, he's suddenly gone sick leave. Now, Paul, we the citizens look at this. We pay our taxes. We try our best to be hopeful about the future. But when the absolute core of a society is rotten to the degree that you've unpacked for us now, you have to wonder, is everybody in on the game, or are we the fools here?
Well, I made the point in the email I sent out on Sunday of this week. I sent an email to Bajani Chowki and to the president. And I said, I think my headline was, "Here we go again, Deja Vu 3. But it's clear to me that he shouldn't have been appointed. I made it clear in the report that we did in March that he was a very high risk appointment, and what we needed was a low risk appointment. And he was appointed. And I said that if nothing happens and Masemola is left in his job, we will have to start ramping up the pressure for his removal. And it's a very big disappointment for the country, because his appointment was, and I'm not saying Cyril was reckless, but somebody was reckless or completely negligent, and I favor the reckless aspects of it, because his appointment was irrational. Now, I don't know if Bajani Chowki gave my report to Cyril or not. I didn't ask. But if he gave my report to Cyril, then Cyril acted irrational as well, because it means he would have had a report which red flagged Fannie Masemola as the chief of police, and yet they still went ahead and appointed him. And that was a bad decision, not just bad for the government, but bad for the people in this country. Because without good ethical leadership, the police will carry on doing what they're doing at the moment, which is not getting on top of the crime in South Africa. Now,
ignoring to a large degree. But let's just go back to the State of the Nation address. Again, Cyril Ramaphosa, he's under a lot of pressure. He's going into the elective conference next month, where he may or may not retain presidency of the ANC and hence the country. But in the State of a Nation address, he says, Masemola has been appointed and, quote, "You have the weight of the nation's expectations resting on your shoulders, but I am confident that you are more than up to the task and responsibility." Now, Paul, you've exposed Patlani. He's being charged, the same guy who bribed Patlani, or so it appears, was involved with bribing Masemola with Louis Vuitton handbags, as you know, which cost tens of thousands of rands on a trip, which enabled, as the newspaper report says, these police, Masemola's crew, to buy vests for 5 times the price that they would have had to pay locally. So all of this, and it's the same guy. It's exactly the same guy who's been co-charged with Patlani. Where is Cyril? Is he asleep at the wheel in this case?
Well, if he knows, if he read that report of mine and he appointed Masemola, then he's got some questions to answer. And I've sent this email on Sunday. It's now Wednesday, and I've not had a response. So it's a problem. We can't have a police force that, like the police force we've had since the year 2000, we have not had proper leadership in the police for 22 years. The police has been leadership-less. It's been like a rudderless ship. And the bad news is that crime continues spiraling upwards. the good men and women in the police service are not being recognised, or they're being sidelined. General Reed should have been appointed as chief of police. There's no doubt in my mind about that. Instead, he resigned and he left the police. And when I spoke to him, he said the reason he resigned was because he knew that Masemola would victimize him, and he didn't want to work in a toxic environment, and therefore he resigned and left the police. And I've suggested in my email to Cyril that it's crucial, it's critical that the police in this country be fixed, and be fixed quickly, and to demonstrate some backbone by either firing this guy now or just paying him off. He's got less than a year to run to his 60th birthday, so he has no legal expectation of being employed past the age of 60. Now, if he can be paid off and got rid of, that will pave the way for appointing a proper person. And if they're going to appoint, if they're going to appoint a proper person, my suggestion is that they approach General Reed and say, listen here, we want you back in the police. Unresign and come back and lead the police, because he's a good person and he will do a proper job. And our lifestyle audit on him shows he's a person that lives within his means. He has no checkered background. He's a career policeman for the whole of his life. So he would be an ideal person for the position. And of course, he's a person of color as well. So he's not a white, pale male, as they call them. And if Cyril doesn't get a grip of this, it will be his downfall. The Phala Phala thing will pale into insignificance. Cyril has appointed this guy, and I'm saying he's not fit for purpose. And if he's not fit for purpose, we need an explanation as to why he was appointed and how it happened, who was behind it, what was going on behind the scenes. We do know that within a week of his appointment, he was flying around the country in the police jet with the Minister of Police. I call him the Minister of Crime. Now, Bekichelli is a civilian. He's not the police officer. And the rules for the use of police aircraft is crystal clear, that civilians are not supposed to be flying on those aircraft. And there needs to be a proper explanation. We need to know exactly each and every flight. These two have been joined at the hip since Masemola was appointed. Why? If one looks at the situation with the tragic tavern deaths in the Eastern Cape, where all these youngsters got intoxicated and passed away, Masemola and Bekichelli went down there to do a media conference about that incident. And most of the questions that the media asked, before Masemola could answer them, Bekichelli jumped in and answered them. Bekichelli considers himself to be the chief of police still, and he conducts himself as if he is the chief of police. And he's not fit for purpose as police minister, let alone chief of police. And here we have a situation where his alter ego is now Masemola, and it's wrong. We need good, strong leadership in the police.
Now, all of this, and we do know that our BizNews TV's reach is global. If anybody from outside of South Africa will look at this and say, what a crazy country this is. But I want to ask you, just to close off with, to comment on something that I saw which was crazy even for us. It's a report in the Pretoria News that the driving instructors, Pretoria News, a reputable, very long-standing newspaper, one presumes, that the driving instructors in Pretoria were picketing outside of the examination center because the examiners have increased their bribe to pass someone from 1,700 Rand to 2,000 Rand. Now, Paul, I mean, there are so many things wrong with this story, starting from why, if that is in the public domain, the police, and the police are headquartered, or presumably still headquartered in Pretoria, shouldn't be all over the driving examiners. Because in South Africa, it doesn't matter, it appears, if the story is correct, how well you drive, it's whether or not you can afford to pay the driving instructor the now increased level of bribe. Yeah. Come on, help me out here.
And no, I think it's a fact that people that can drive are not going to get a driving license unless they pay a bribe. And the failure of the police to do anything about it really goes to the lack of leadership in the police. Having said that, if that sort of thing is going on, it would amount to organized crime. Now, we do know that there's a new head of organized crime in South Africa. It's a person who I know very, very well, and it's Shadrach Sibiya. General Sibiya is now head of organized crime. So maybe we're going to see some backsides getting kicked now. He's only been in the job a few weeks because there was a court ruling that his dismissal by Paklani, Nklemeza, this whole bloody shebang of people that were corrupt, they went in 2015. In 2014, if you recall, Anwar Dramat was suspended on Christmas Eve. And on Christmas Day, Nklemeza was appointed as the new acting head of the DPCI. I mean, why you appoint a criminal as a head of the Hawks, God above only knows, but that's what they did. And his appointment was subsequently ruled unlawful by the Constitutional Court. Now, and yet that man did so much damage to the DPCI. And I mean, there was a report issued a couple of weeks ago by the DPCI judge, which implicates the leadership of the DPCI in the breaches of my constitutional rights. You know, they dragged me off planes and they did all sorts of nasty things to me. And I filed a complaint in 2016. The report was issued in October 2022, 6 years later. And it castigates the leadership of the DPCI. Now, I'm just left wondering why the police, somebody doesn't say, right, let's get a grip of this and fix it. And it's all fixable. There's nothing there that can't be fixed. And the best place to start is to put in a good manager. And they haven't done that. They put in this fellow Masemola. When I write to him, and I've had to write to him since his appointment in respect of several matters, and the matters I've written to him about are matters of national importance, and I get a response from one of his sidekicks saying the matter is being attended to, but they've actually done nothing. You know, we appeared in court, Paklani, well, we didn't. Paklani appeared in court with a whole lot of other senior police officials a couple of months ago in Pretoria in the Commercial Crimes Court. And I was there, and I subsequently wrote to Masemola demanding an explanation as to why the senior police officials that appeared in court that day went back to their offices to work the next day. And all I get is an answer saying the matter is being dealt with. That's not a proper answer. I wanted to hear that they'd been immediately suspended and that they would be dismissed. The charge sheet against them, it involves the same person, by the way. The guy that bought Masemola his luxury bags, allegedly, because I've not seen the evidence, so I had to say allegedly. But the guy that allegedly purchased Masemola's Louis Vuitton bag is the same guy that had to appear in court with them. And I'm left wondering, well, there's a conflict of interest in Masemola not suspending them. And he's a bit of a fool to do so because he's brought attention on himself now. Because I didn't just write to him, I sent a copy of my email to the president, and I sent it to Shamila Batohi and to Andrea Johnson, and I said it's unacceptable that a person at the rank of general is arraigned in court for fraud and corruption, and he's allowed to go back to his office to continue with whatever fraud and corruption he was involved in and to intimidate potential witnesses against him. So we need a big cleanup, and it needs to start. And it needs to not only start, it needs to be done with a bit of gusto. And the only person I've been able to lay my eyes on right now that can actually do that is General Reed.
Paul O'Sullivan from Forensics for Justice. You really can't make this stuff up. In South Africa, the facts are far stranger than fiction. I'm Alec Hogg from BizNews.com.